Hi everybody, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Lou, and I like to research random topics that interest me and turn that into video essays. If you like it, please subscribe, and if you don't like it, do not tell me because I will cry. All right, let's get right back into it. So yeah, this is part 2 out of part 3 on my series, Deep Dive on Televangelists. If you have not watched part 1, you're gonna feel real silly because this is part 2. And we've talked about a lot of stuff in part 1. So in the previous video, we had set the context. We are doing a deep dive on televangelism, and we had talked about doctrinal, historical, and legal context. We saw that everything that they are doing is legal, partly because of the First Amendment. The televangelists' activities are performed to gather followers and to amass money, thanks to the oftentimes naive generosity of their congregation. Those donations, though legal, pose a moral problem and could be considered as the result of an abuse of power or an abuse of vulnerable people. And today we are going in depth about that form of abuse. Today we're looking into techniques used by televangelists to attract followers and to win their loyalty over. We will also attempt to explain the possible judicial measures to prosecute those televangelists' questionable methods. With a doctrine that literally revolves around money, sow your seeds, tithing, etc., and with a rather bad reputation in the American religious landscape, we can wonder how televangelists reach such a huge number of followers. To give you a rough idea, there were about 16 million of prosperity gospel followers in America in 2006. That is 3 times the amount of practicing Jewish people in America. Word of Faith, or the prosperity gospel, is a movement classified as a religious cult. According to many sources, including Cult Education, Watchman Organization, and authors Weiss and Moore in their book titled Broken Faith Inside the World of Word of Faith Fellowship, One of America's Most Dangerous Cults, 2013. A religious cult, by definition, is a gathering of members united under the same belief, whether it be in God or some higher entity. The members are also tied together by a belief in the same theology. So, salvation, life after death in general. The leader of a religious cult will reinterpret passages from the Bible to fit their narrative. Because they want to spread a specific ideology, so they need some scripture to make it believable. I don't know, I'm not a cult leader. We actually observe that in the Word of Faith doctrine with the little gods and the whole Jesus went to hell and killed Satan and became Satan, whatever, if you remember that from part 1. Also, the leader of a cult is generally a particularly charismatic character. They are a figure of authority with orator talents, and their role is to gather and influence the masses, and ideally to recruit new members. That charismatic figure sounds a lot like a televangelist. They just fit that description. They have strong personalities. They deliver their speeches as self-evident truths. They don't want to be put into question or doubted by their followers. The truth they put out there is the only truth there is. And their congregation doesn't practice critical thinking in relation to what they hear from their leader. The truth presented is inflexible, immutable. The members are, by definition, prone to proselytism and invest a lot of time and money into the cult. To Word of Faith, Bible study is highly encouraged several times a week, in addition to weekly services. That kind of routine guarantees to keep the influence of the cult going. Televangelists perform intense sermons, faith healing, public confessions, self-flagellation, speaking in tongues, etc., etc. Those violent and intense practices are straining to the body and the mind of the follower, and thus ensures a complete surrender to the cult. Monetary gain and money in general is another very important part of a cult. It is sometimes linked to the cult's very own theology. The follower is pressured into giving money to the group, to the leader, to earn a prize, and that prize can be luck, prosperity, health, you name it. Word of Faith has a perfect example of that, and that is seed faith that we discussed in the previous part. In this part, we will focus and analyze the methods put in place by televangelists that are used to indoctrinate Word of Faith followers. Indoctrination. Let's talk about it. We call indoctrination the action of wanting to control someone's behavior and their judgment by imposing rules and strict ways of thinking. In our case, it is easy to infer that Word of Faith followers are indoctrinated because they show signs of not being able to use their own judgment. They are taught to believe in one single absolute truth, and they give away their money because they trust their favorite televangelist. The televangelist is their guide because to them, televangelists are the middlemen between them and God. Televangelists gather their followers in one appointed place of worship in the form of megachurches sometimes. Other times it's just like a normal church in a small town. Troy Kubelar, a professional hypnotist, analyzed the practices of Benny Hinn in 2005 and went ahead and compared the scenography and choreographies put in place by that televangelist. He found that most of what Benny Hinn does on stage is mass hypnosis. Troy then explains, I'm going to call this guy Troy because I can't keep butchering his last name. So Troy then explains that the atmosphere in Word of Faith megachurches is very precisely controlled, and everything that happens in there happens for a reason and is done with the intention of putting the followers in a state of trance. Benny Hinn in particular is known for his intense theatricality during his healing sessions. In general, what happens is he calls on someone in the audience. That person walks up to the stage. It's usually a person who is sick or needs healing, and Benny goes ahead and performs hypnosis on that person to propel them into a trance. And that person will react very physically. It's a very visual spectacle. He uses his so-called mesmerist powers. He imposes healing on the chosen person's body. He shoves them and pushes them until they fall. He blows air on them. He maintains people on the floor. Troy actually attended many of these services in order to learn his hypnosis skills. In Trevor Glass's documentary called Suffer the Children, amazing documentary, by the way, go watch it, it's on YouTube. Troy explains that hypnosis happens in different stages using different methods. Those methods, if you add entertaining talents on top of them and the charisma of a televangelist, give you a perfectly well-rounded mass hypnosis process. The first important component of mass hypnosis is language, and above all, routine language. Each service, the same expressions, the same words will be repeated over and over. It's kind of a comfort zone for the congregation. It's reassuring. You've heard this before. So your guard is down because you trust these people. They also use language that push the audience to visualize things in their minds with catchphrases such as visualize this, picture this, imagine yourself doing this. So yeah, that gives them full control of the audience's mental images. So the televangelist is a charismatic character indeed, highly trusted by his congregation. So it's not that hard for him to send his audience into a trance. Don't forget that these services are usually also televised, and thus this mass trance kind of extends to people watching TV. I'm not saying that people in their living rooms are getting hypnotized, but so once that language stage is completed, some people will start to physically surrender. And that could look like uncontrollable dancing or speaking in tongues, or yeah, everything gets more intense. Words are louder, rhythm gets faster. And when you are in a group setting, if you see other people doing weird stuff, you will not measure how weird it is, right? You don't judge because you are among peers, so you conform to the mass reaction because you don't want to feel left out. And that is why the context of a church is so important for this mass hypnosis to work. The group is a powerful entity in society, but even more so in a religious context. Michel Mauroy, author and psychiatrist, calls this phenomenon, and I'm going to be speaking French here, le nous fusionnel, which is the idea of a collective merging. The group becomes one. There is no sense of individuality anymore. The nous fusionnel is considered an ideal to reach in a religious setting, actually. Another professional hypnotist thinks another big part of a successful mass trance is music. It has the power to inspire, relax, and manipulate our thoughts and emotions. It is designed to engage us at both the conscious and subconscious levels. It can make a person angry, sad, happy, sleepy, or even inspire the listener with confidence before a big event. He compares this instrumentalization of music to pagan rituals in antiquity. The music starts out slow and calming at the beginning of service. It goes crescendo to reach a peak of intensity during healing, a moment when the congregation is highly suggestible, which is also the moment televangelists make the most money requests. And then it goes back to a calmer rhythm towards the end of service. He emphasizes that there is never a moment of silence. So, to summarize all of this, Cheyenne Woodall points out 3 linguistic methods used by televangelists to amass donations. 1. Manipulation through persuasion, the use of we, or the structure of if, we have the solution, emphasizing that they have a solution to anything. Number 2, word of faith lexicon. On average, televangelist Rex Humbert, for example, says the word God twice per minute. And 3, indirect language, for instance, rhetorical questions. And those are basically the same methods used in advertising. Makes sense because they also want your money. They want your brains and your money. Televangelists are actually real performers because you would think that they're doing improv at some points during their service. Because the congregation gets a sense of sincerity, but everything they say and every move they make is calculated. So yeah, very cool techniques, very well thought through, but how moral is it? So we talked about the concept of seed faith in part 1, but we have not gone into the details of it. Let's start by quoting the one and only Oral Roberts from his book, The Miracle of Seed Faith, 1970. In the chapter named Why is Giving Necessary, he says, every time you breathe, breathing is both a giving and receiving. You must breathe out to breathe in. So is your very life, for stop either exhaling or inhaling and you cannot live. Deep. He uses the seed metaphor I'm laughing at the previous quote. He uses the seed metaphor to further explain the essential concept. The farmer who plants a crop must give to the earth. He must sow seed. Otherwise, he will harvest only weeds. The seed he gives to the earth will be multiplied back to him, a far greater return than the amount planted. I cannot take this man seriously. But let's leave that out there for the time being and talk about the American dream before we get into seed faith. Because as it turns out, they are deeply linked. Indeed, with seed faith having been theorized in 1950s America in a context of middle-class bliss, beautiful suburban houses, and nuclear families, it makes that material belongings and financial success would seep into religion. That makes total sense. Televangelists sell a dream and sell God as monetary investment in the middle of a capitalist boom. You can buy God, just like you can buy health, just like you can buy education or a TV. That is what author Jeffrey K. Haddon talks about in his book, The Rise and Fall of an American Televangelism. He says, like automobile and personal hygiene manufacturers, they have a product to sell, they being the televangelists, and the airwaves are a marketing instrument. Televangelists shamelessly link religion and capitalism or consumerism, like Kenneth Copeland, who said, and I quote, "We live in a $1 trillion economy and you can't get hold of a couple $1,000s. It's giving Kim K going, nobody wants to work anymore. Let's take a look at the social class targeted by televangelists. That's very interesting. A demographic study conducted in 2007 reveals the social profile of the audience of Joel Osteen, another televangelist. Researcher Michael S. Jeffress, in his article titled A Study of the Demographics demographics, exposure levels, and perceptions of the viewing audience of Pastor Joel Osteen, America's most popular preacher, shows the following numbers. First thing to note here is that there are a lot more women taking part in this survey, maybe because of the nuclear family model, aka the man is away at work most of the day and women are at home a lot more taking care of the children, among other things. We also noticed that in the sample, the majority of people are in their first marriage. They make between $25,000 to $50,000 a year, which would place them in the lower middle class. A noticeable amount of people interviewed make less than $25,000 a year, which places them below the poverty line. We also see that a lot of people, a majority of people actually, are non-denominational. Some are Pentecostal, some Baptists, which corresponds to what Word of Faith market themselves as. Looking at those figures, we understand that the average person watching televangelists, and specifically Joel Osteen in 2007, is a lower class white woman in her 40s in a first marriage or divorced with a high school diploma. What does that tell us? It is the profile of a person who, in my opinion, aspires to a better life with more money, who wants to see her dreams come true through miracles. Because of the education level and the social class, this profile is not financially literate enough and is easier to indoctrinate. Someone who lacks financial literacy is vulnerable in general, and especially in a religious cult setting. That's very dangerous. Televangelists attract poor people and abuse their power to get money out of them in the name of God. Even if the person is in debt, televangelists push the concept of seed faith and promise God will pay that off for them. Televangelists also don't hesitate to guilt trip their congregation if they don't give enough. For instance, Creflo Dollar in 1997, so another televangelist, said, "If you have been healed or saved or blessed through TBN and have not contributed, you are robbing God and will lose your reward in heaven." Everyone wants to be loved by God and not disappoint God, so that is such a violent threat to direct to a vulnerable religious congregation. There are multiple ways televangelists gather donations. Let's focus on one example. Prayer lines. People can call a number to share their prayers. Those telephone lines are marketed to be God's direct phone line. Isn't that cool? So you say your prayer on the phone, you give them your full name, address, phone number, etc., and your bank details. You give them your bank details. When you hang up, you will start receiving physical mail about twice a month. When you open the envelope, you will see that it is highly suggested you send out some money to donate to God. Otherwise, he will never answer your prayer. When the followers' donations amount to $1,000, the ministry assigns a code to the follower, a code that corresponds to a prayer category. Stay with me here. Your prayer is then transferred to the prayer staff, who go ahead and pray in bulk. They pray in bulk. In bulk. For example, if you were praying for your mother to recover from a stroke, that falls into the health prayers category. So the prayer staff will pray once for the 400,000 other people who prayed for good health. Time effective, cost effective, bingo. There are other examples of donation campaigns that rely on the illusion of, oh look, that's for free, when it's actually not. In an article by ABC News, Carol Bercier testifies. She was going through a rough patch in 2001 and decided to order a little pack of free magic water she heard about watching televangelist Peter Popoff. This water was supposedly meant to be drank in order to be prosperous and rich. She got her little pack of water in the mail, and when she opened to look at the instructions pamphlet, it was written that you are supposed to keep that water pack on your bedside table for a couple of nights, and then to drink it immediately after waking up on the second day. Once that's done, it was instructed to send the empty pack back to Popoff through the mail, along with $17. So my girl Carol does exactly that. After she sent the empty bottle or water pack back, along with the $17, she kept receiving magic trinkets from Popoff, along with some super intense letters love bombing. She was to use those trinkets and send it back each time along with a donation. She ended up donating about $500 in the course of a few weeks. She ends her testimony with those words. Televangelists are very effective in appealing to the desperately faithful. Being broke or in debt is no excuse to not write a check. In fact, it's an ideal opportunity, for God is especially generous to those who give when they can least afford it. Televangelists keep track of how much you're giving and promise that eventually you'll get a ticket to heaven. So to conclude on this part, you might be like, how is this legal? Can they be sued? Short answer is yes, but also no. So let's move on and attempt to answer to that question. So for this part, I actually interviewed Pete Evans. He is from the Trinity Foundation based out of Dallas, Texas. The Trinity Foundation helps out people who fell victim to the abuse of power exerted by televangelists. Pete Evans has been advocating for cult victims since 1990, so he knows a thing or two. A little bit more about the Trinity Foundation. It was founded in 1972 as a nonprofit aiming to educate Texans about the dangers of new religious branches. Evans told me that the organization started to feel worried about televangelists' intentions in the late 80s. Nowadays, the foundation focuses on monitoring financial fraud, and most of the investigations that are led are based off of victims' specific complaints and about specific televangelists. Evans explains their course of actions as follows. We will get a complaint by email, for instance, about an individual, and then we start an investigation on that individual. If the complaints start to add up, or if the newspaper articles start to add up about that particular televangelist, then we will start a file on them. We follow the smell factor. If it starts to really stink, then we will create a report about that televangelist and send that file to the IRS. Newspapers call us very often and say, do you have information about such and such individual or televangelist? And we present them with what we have. Since 1987, Evans regularly sits in Congress as a witness for religious industry matters. The foundation collaborated with ABC News to talk about religious scams, CBS News, CNN special reports, the Wall Street Journal. They're legit. I'm only citing a few. From 2005 to 2011, Evans worked closely with the U.S. Senate Finance Committee. And he told me about the in-depth investigation he conducts on televangelists and their material possessions. We have an inordinate amount of files on televangelists' jets and aircraft, their properties and mansions. Like I said, we focus on financial fraud or financial excess. We are careful, and so we use the word excess instead of fraud, because the majority of the televangelists that we are investigating are not doing anything illegal because of loopholes in the law here in the US, are large enough to drive a truck through. He also told me about the concept of affinity fraud. And I'm sorry, this is all reported speech. It's a bit boring. Sorry, I'm just going to read with a tone. So he told me about the concept of affinity fraud. It is when a televangelist is targeted by a Ponzi schemer, and the televangelist or the preacher will profit for a while. Investment looks good. He doubles his money in a short period of time. For example, it increases by 30%. So he begins to introduce people, an audience, or associates to the Ponzi schemer. That's one form of affinity fraud. The televangelist is a participant in a Ponzi scheme. It has been proven that Benny Hinn has participated in 2 of those. Benny Hinn was in court in 2006 for money laundering amounting to about $175 million. The court dismissed the case despite video recording of Benny Hinn proving his actions, because those videos were not receivable in a court of justice. But Evans thinks that the most common type of fraud is solicitation fraud, which is dangerous for the average citizen because it often leads to abuse of power and breach of trust. He talked about a recent case, recent-ish, I think it was 2018 or something, involving involving Paula White and explained how hard it is to stop these people from acting up. I quote, "She is President Trump's spiritual advisor, continues to operate her own private companies and religious operations, ministry, and church, while she is working part-time in the Oval Office. She is asking people to give a first fruit offering and promising them that they will get a healing, wealth, or get pregnant. So that sort of fraud is practiced by a huge amount of prosperity preachers." Because of her influential position in the government, because that interview dates back to like 2018, so Trump was still in office, it is really hard to stop her. Evans also denounces IRS fraud, of course, and points the finger at the system's numerous loopholes. Because churches don't have to file public financial information, most of the televangelists we investigate have created churches and are operating two businesses under the covering of the church. To illustrate, here's a couple examples. One is Benny Hinn Ministries, operates under the World Healing Center Church. He has a couple published books and a couple other businesses that operate under World Healing Center Church, but yet the World Healing Center Church is registered as a small organization that was founded when the IRS began investigating them. They realized they needed a church in the 80s, so he got rid of his church in Orlando, Florida, and so he moved to Dallas, Texas, and to the California area to form his production company. In California, for a while, he had a small church of 100 people, which he would get maybe $100,000 a year from, and yet he's getting $150 million a year from donors from all over the country and around the world. So his organization really is not a church, in our opinion. Legally, it might be a church because his church follows some of the 14 rules set by the IRS. You don't even have to follow all of them to create a church. There are plenty of cases that only follow the rule of having a place of worship and are still accepted as churches for the law. So, what can justice do to protect congregations and punish unlawful televangelists? That's a good question. We, the Trinity Foundation, believe it's fraud. Once you give your money through a donation, there's plenty of case law that says that you gave your money freely. Also, usually when you make a donation to a televangelist, there is a clause written in the smallest size stating something like, "We're not promising any healings," so that frees the ministry from liability. There's just not enough case law in that area to actually hold that ministry or the televangelist responsible. So the problem is, we tried in the 90s, and from time to time we tried to establish some case law, but lawyers, especially criminal lawyers, are reluctant to take cases on religious fraud. Because in America, when you want to convict someone of fraud, you have to prove intent. And televangelists would say in court that they did not intend to harm somebody or fraud somebody, that they believe that God really would answer the plaintiff's prayers if they gave their money. For example, Paula White, she would claim in court that she really believed that God would bless this person and heal them if they gave a big fruit offering. So there are not many remedies in court. It should be a lot easier to prove in a civil case, but that's what we've been waiting for, to have cases come along. Evans concluded our interview by explaining how important it is for victims to come forward. It is the only way things can change. If enough victims come forward, he could file what we call a RICO lawsuit. That stands for Racketeer, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations, which exists since 1970. It is a federal law that calls for heavy prison sentences for organized criminal groups. The law counts a list of 35 felonies, including fraudulent religious solicitation that could match the actions of televangelists. However, RICO lawsuits have immense financial stakes, and televangelists could take advantage of that. Televangelists usually know that they are being scrutinized and have the best lawyers. But Evans told me it's worth fighting for. These insane loopholes need to be taken care of in a court of justice. All right, it is the end of the video. I'm going to leave it there for now. This is the end of part 2. Part 3 is going to be coming eventually. If you know someone who was a victim of televangelism and who would be interested in talking to Pete Evans, you can do so by contacting him through Twitter. This is his handle, so at Trinity Tweets, or through email at trinity@trinityfi.org. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you liked it. Once again, if you did not like it, do not tell me because I will cry. And I will see y'all for the next one. Hopefully in not not 6 months. But yeah, these videos take a long time to script, to film, whatever. But yeah, I'm really enjoying this series. I love the world of televangelism, not their actions. I just think they're interesting. And if you find it interesting too, please follow me on here, subscribe, and I will see you for the next part 3. Bye. Have a good day.